Good morning, everyone. Morning. Okay, this is just a check to ensure that you're still here and that you're happy to hear even more presentations. Another check. Can you see me? Okay, great. Bit tiny, yeah? So I just wanted to know. Okay, I'm really honored to be here. And a word of thanks to the ICAC, the leaders, as well as the World Justice Project, who put this together. And I'm saying this not just that this is an ordinary symposium or conference, but it's very crucial conversations for Asia, for this part of the world. And it's very timely, very important. When I heard yesterday the link up with human rights, how the Chief Justice actually spoke so much about the rule of law, how it needs to be tied in with the Constitution, democratic institutions, the work of asset recovery. It's just so multidisciplined. And I think we're all here with a lot of experience to share. So I wanted to thank you for that. And a word also about why this is very important for this region. Because in the last 12 or 18 months, we've had so many examples, well, quite a few examples of people power. And that is what my presentation is going to be about. It's about citizen power in ousting corruption. There were so many governments in this part of the world, at least, that I just stood in awe that corruption was such a primary driving force for change of regimes during elections. We had South Korea. When South Korea ousted their president, that was not elections, but that was purely on a corruption scandal. And Malaysians went, oh my God, we have a far bigger scandal and we still have to deal with this with our former prime minister then. But what the Koreans did, every day, every week, they stood courageously to ask the current prime minister, who was embroiled then, to actually get out of the way because of the alleged corruption scandals. Now, I'm just trying to emphasize the power of where citizens actually come in. And then we had Malaysia. The impossible actually became possible. And that was in May 2018. We are very multi-ethnic, very multi-religious, and we've never had a change of government for 61 years since our independence. But it happened. And the largest driver, I mean, there were many other reasons, rising cost of living, many kinds of violations and all that, but it was all related to very large corruption scandals. And it happened. It happened in Malaysia, something that no one really believed was actually possible. It happened. And then it happened in Pakistan, which was just like 2 months after. And then it happened in Maldives. And all these are actually countries in Asia, which no one really thought a change was going to be so easy. Well, it definitely wasn't easy. And it definitely took a whole range of actors, definitely those in institutions, in enforcement agencies, but very much so those that actually involved people from the media, lawyers, civil society organizations, academics, think tanks, and the general public. And I think we really need to look at this session and see where actually the power of the ordinary citizen can be further empowered. Because we have seen that in elections, it can happen. But it's really very difficult, because one of the easiest processes to corrupt is actually the electoral process. And we have seen it in Malaysia, we have seen it in many other countries, that it is something that is very difficult to overcome via elections. But it has happened. So I'm just going to further say that I wanted to acknowledge my esteemed colleagues from Malaysia, in particular Tan Sri Abu Qasim, who is now heading the GIACC, and he was the former Chief Commissioner of the MECC, and at that time, we had worked together on a number of issues, including making institutions more independent, even in the most difficult times. And so I believe that we have all worked together to find a way to make that monumental change happen in Malaysia. So very happy to share a couple of things with you. I'm not sure if I'm pressing the right thing. Okay, got it. Okay, just a quick introduction of the organization. It's called C4, It's the Center to Combat Corruption and Cronyism. It stands by 4 principles. But in Malaysia, it was actually coined after something a little bit naughty because it was named after a bomb that involved another corruption scandal that used to kill a Mongolian woman using C4 explosives in the course of her being involved as the lover of the main person who was actually involved in the corruption scandal and all that. So it became something incredibly sensational in Malaysia, but something that never got resolved because it involved high levels of political leadership. It involved the defense minister, the former deputy prime minister, who then became prime minister, and we all know his name now is Najib Razak, who was the prime minister who was eventually ousted. So this center founded in 2014, we are one of the key whistleblower advocates. We advocate for independent, courageous, evidence-based research, also do policy reform, and globally, we actually work a lot on the UNCAC. So we are board members of the UNCAC coalition. But before that, I just wanted to take you back to the situation pre-general elections. Our general elections was about a year ago, on the 9th of May, 2018. And the scenario leading up to the general elections was one that was getting bleaker and darker and darker. And it wasn't just about 1 or 2 persons being arrested or hauled up, but it was pretty serious because we had, on the same day, the Deputy Prime Minister as well as the Attorney General sacked within a few hours of finding out that there were possible corruption charges that were going to be placed on the former Prime Minister. We had compromised institutions because there was very strong executive control to close the case. And then we had many issues, street protests, many creative ways of how we tried to actually get public to be educated over a very complex financial scandal that involved so many countries, so many banks, so many companies, so many offshore islands, as well as shell companies, the entire works of where we are today, of how illicit financial flows actually move across the world so extensively. And this is the 1MDB scandal that actually rocked the entire nation. What is it? These are the details. Very basically, it's about 11 billion US dollars, or about 42 billion ringgit from a sovereign wealth fund, which was spent. And out of that, the US Department of Justice estimated that 4.5 billion was actually lost or stolen. And then the Wall Street Journal, and this is where I actually want to pay heed to international investigative journalists, broke the story that out of the 4.5 billion, 700 million, sorry, this billion and million, now we are talking billions. So out of that 4.5 billion, 700 million US dollars was actually banked into the personal bank account of the former Prime Minister. And that was how brave he was, that he would never be found out, because he was also, apart from Prime Minister, he was also the finance minister. So there was so much power, political power, financial power, there was everything. And then we found out it wasn't just the 700 million, it was a trail of very complex financial flows, which 4 big chunks of it, which actually got into his bank account, went back into some other shell companies and different company flows in order to benefit his family members and so on and so forth. Now, I am just going through the details because I believe that this is something that you need to know in order to understand the context of Malaysia, because some people were also asking me what happened and all that, and I thought it was good to know. This is the former Prime Minister at the center. And we have on the left-hand side some of the key collaborators with him. His wife, his son. His son actually got a certain amount of money to produce an Academy Award-nominated film called The Wolf on Wall Street, which featured Leonardo DiCaprio. And there were lots of issues about the stolen money being used to make the movie. Leonardo DiCaprio got a stolen Marlon Brando award being given to him as a gift. And so the DOJ was investigating all this. And we have on the right-hand side the whistleblowers, the brave people, the people who actually spoke up during the investigation. And on the extreme right, we had our business newspaper, The Edge, reporting on the story, and The Edge got suspended together with a few other media for actually highlighting the story. And then the people were angry because all that corruption scandals was happening. It was being reported externally overseas, but the local media was actually being controlled for not being able to report it. So there were some rallies. Tangkap Najib, tangkap Rosmah. Tangkap means catch. But who got caught in the end? It wasn't them, it was the people. And there were many arrests, many people being sent to jail, and so on and so forth. But it never really stopped the brave people from being creative. It might look a bit offensive, but I think the situation was so critical, so desperate, because every time you even ask something on your Facebook, you could be hauled up to the police station the next day to say, why did you say such a thing? And there's something called the Communications Multimedia Act that can actually penalize you for a seditious posting. We have a sedition law in Malaysia that actually can charge anyone who says offensive things to the government. But offensive is not very well defined, so anything that's insulting or sounds a bit offensive to the government, you could get charged. So this is a former British colonial law that is up for amendments in the current and new Malaysian context. Okay, so we got that situation, and I'm showing you another few slides, which there was a graphic artist who drew a clown picture of the former Prime Minister in jail. And, well, of course, he was the one that was then charged for this offensive act under the Sedition Act. But he became such a superstar because the global media started to feature him on CNN, on BBC World, and so on. For why is he doing something like this? Is it for public education? Is it that he was personally angry, or what it was? And so these kind of pictures were then outlawed. And we had further cartoonists drawing the wife of the former Prime Minister actually getting so much money as part of the stolen 1MDB money that she actually bought, among other things, a pink diamond ring costing about 112 or 108 USD million, one diamond ring for herself. And apparently she had got on to a luxury yacht to actually meet the jeweler, etc., etc. And so there were many things. And these things were actually found out. What was stolen, which property, how many hotels in New York, how many hotels in London, because of the US Department of Justice actually being extremely diligent about looking and tracing assets that were stolen in the United States and bought with 1MDB money, which is illegal money. So many of these were actually used for public education and things like that. So all these people were charged, and this cartoonist was actually charged for 9 counts of sedition, which would amount to 42 years of prison if he was found guilty of all charges. So it was about the use of cartoons, the use of graphic design, the use of anything just to get public imagination captured, and the need to actually vote out corruption because the general elections was coming. And was it possible to actually elect the same prime minister who was actually allegedly stealing so much money? But because the institutions were largely compromised, it was also difficult to actually have any of the cases that were filed in court to actually see the light of day. It was really tough. Now, the next one is by my organization. We came up with a board game called Kleptopoly. This one is it's a fun game. It's like a Monopoly. It's a Monopoly-inspired game. And we put all the DOJ-listed stolen property on the board. So it was all these New York apartments, London apartments, and everything. And we created the figurines of the main characters in the 1MDB scandal. And this one was amazing because it just sold like hotcakes to the Malaysian people everywhere. And it became something very interesting. That we would use board games to actually introduce public education in order to fight corruption. Now, then it got featured by CNBC, by Bloomberg, and everything, and it just helped get the attention going. But it also helped to get the attention, unnecessary ones from the police on us, so we were also called in for questioning. But yeah, and then in the lead up to the elections, there were more and more crackdowns. We had an anti-fake news law introduced in Parliament like a week before Parliament was dissolved for the elections. And the anti-fake news law was to actually stop these things, the cartoonists, the people who were actually speaking up from spreading fake news, that actually the corruption never happened. It's just a bad business deal. Why do you say it's corruption? But isn't the DOJ also saying it's corruption? Isn't the other jurisdictions also investigating these things? And so on and so forth. And then we had electoral boundaries redrawn, so bizarre that it would go in, you know, really ridiculous ways to divide and rule the ethnic populations around elections to ensure that the ruling coalition would have a better chance for victory because they're all based on ethnic populations. Now, in the last 5 minutes, I don't want to repeat too much, but I think Tan Sri Abu Qasim has given us a tremendous picture of hope after the impossible happened. The elections came, and the results was just staggering because no one expected that with so much oppression that the people would actually come out and vote for change. But they did. And they did for the first time in 61 years. That's why I feel it's a very special, very spectacular time in Malaysia that all the different stakeholders are now coming together to look at where the reform agenda can actually work. So, I'm showing you, sorry. Now, these are other scandals that involve the rural population on farming and so on. Okay, so this slide is quite important because the one called Rebuilding Our Nation, Fulfilling Our Hopes is the Buku Harapan, or the Book of Hope, which the political coalition, which was then in the opposition, actually came up with 60 promises to actually get voters to believe that they will actually institute these reforms. So now, they won. Pakatan Harapan actually won. And so now the onus is on them to actually deliver. And out of the 60 large promises, 21 anti-corruption, governance-related reforms. And I think Tan Sri yesterday already showed it, that some of it have been implemented in government policy in the last year. The first is the midterm review of the 11th Malaysia Plan, which has placed a pillar for governance that also includes the introduction of an ombudsman's office, which is something which is very important, the IPCMC, the Independent Police and Misconduct Commission, as well as the anti-corruption plan, which I had a chance to be on the drafting committee together with Tan Sri Abu Qasim, and I think he has now got a tremendous task of going around the country actually implementing the plan, which is a tremendous success because there's never been a roadmap to fight corruption before. In fact, there's never really been a roadmap for anything much before, but now we have a roadmap, and I think we really require the collaboration of and international assistance of a lot of the experts here in this room. And then, back to the citizen. Now that we have a new government, there was tremendous euphoria all around. It's like, oh, give this new coalition a chance. Let's make it happen. Let's make Malaysia an example for this part of the world, for Asia, for the world. And so what would be the role of the citizen then? For me, personally, I believe we need to continue to do these two things. We need to speak up and be heard. We must. Because if we keep quiet and we have placed all our hopes in a new regime without actually holding them to account, it may turn out to be the same thing. And then we need to still continue to blow the whistle on wrongdoings, on public malfeasance, on anything, in order to assist MACC and to assist the institutions to actually be aware that many things are happening. So there's still, and I'm proud of this, that there's still many community groups that are actually working to look at development which might be not sustainable, which might involve corruption, local government corruption. There are many, many issues that are still being heard. But we must never forget that as lawyers, as media practitioners, as civil society, policy think tanks, and many others, we have to continue to speak up, because this is what a robust, dynamic country would actually need, that the public is never docile. Then we have created something with local government, even before the last elections. It's called the My Clean City app, because Malaysia is one of those countries that does not have local council election, believe it or not. And many of the transgressions actually happen at local level, from procurement to actually getting services delivery done. The services are actually very poor, despite the fact that residents pay assessments and all that. So this is where using technology, using your mobile phone, where you can download an app to actually make a complaint about a pothole or a drain that is actually infested with rubbish and so on, all those basic problems, or street lights not working, etc., can actually be dealt with via a mobile phone, and it is actually tied to the complaint system of one of the local authorities in Malaysia called MPPJ, Petaling Jaya City Council, and so on. It's being monitored to see whether there's interest, there's effectiveness, whether the local council public officials are actually a bit more stressed because the public are watching them and they know what's happening and so on. So it's being monitored. And finally, also because my time is up, we've just introduced this, a bit funny, but something that we wanted creativity again, to actually track Pakatan Harapan's performance 1 year and onwards via a litmus color scheme. You know, if we all did science and we remember pH is equals to Pakatan Harapan, pH is also the pH litmus test. So if they do very badly, then they would be the more orange-red sector. And if they actually, say, implemented a law on freedom of information, or a law on declaration of assets, both of which we don't have, or even a more difficult law like the law on political financing, then definitely that would be good grades for Pakatan Harapan. But it is just being introduced as a tracker for public feedback, because we believe that this is not and cannot be left to the politicians alone. They need to know that the public is also watching them, and that there is a feedback mechanism that if you actually have a complaint, you can actually write about it, and then MACC can be alerted, the police can be alerted, local authorities can be alerted, and so on and so forth. So it's been, well, not too badly received, quite well, and just a bit not so scientific that we're doing it via color codes, but it is also, there's also a reason for it. And there's a whole repository of articles to actually back up why a certain policy is going in the right way, wrong way, or is being stalled because of electoral dynamics, racial dynamics, and a whole range of other problems that Malaysia is facing. So I just hope that some of these little things can actually help us have a conversation further on where it is that we can actually engage further the ordinary citizen in fighting corruption. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Gabriel.